Thank you, JP and the Impact Hub, and also to our colleague Claire who organized tonight's event. Thank you for bringing us all together. I think it's remarkable and inspiring to see everyone coming out to an event to learn about these critical issues. So thank you so much. So tonight's conversation will be an interesting opportunity to hear from Kevin Reed and Carol Leibel, the CEO of Domini Impact Investments. I'll begin by inviting you both to introduce yourselves. So you obviously know we have two experts, and I think part of what's nice about this conversation tonight is bringing together the deep science and then one of the key leverage tools in finance. So in tonight's conversation, we're going to start with Kevin and Carol painting the context, helping us understand climate change and extreme weather events and the role of finance. Then we'll talk a little bit about our location specifically here in New York, the local impacts I think that any of us who live here have already started to experience. We'll talk about then what tools do we have at our disposal, whether through climate modeling and extreme weather event data and analytics, or through investing to leverage and advance change. And then what is each of our individual roles? So that's where the conversation will take us tonight. And we'll start with you, Kevin.
So the reality is that climate change is most visible through changes in our weather. And so while the complexity of climate, right, if you look at these reports that are tens of thousands of pages, they're important scientific endeavors. But what they really do is try to get down to the foundations of what is causing that change, and then trying to understand what those changes are coming from and how can we project them in the future. And so, just to kind of take a step back, why are we seeing these changes? Well, these changes are actually coming from the fact that we're changing our Earth system. And one of the simplest ways to think about that is that the Earth system, it needs to balance its energy. So, we could talk about radiation, and we could go into climate 101, but I'm not going to. I'm going to just provide a quick analogy. If you think about a bathtub, right, you have the drain and you have the faucet that leads into it. In a stable climate, you have the drain undone a little bit, but you have the faucet turned on so that the level of the water stays the same. In reality, what we're doing in the climate system is we're shutting down the drain so it doesn't drain as efficiently, but we're not changing the faucet. So the water level in the bathtub goes up. And so this is exactly what's happening in the climate system. We're doing things like changing our land surface so that it doesn't reflect as much of that radiation and energy that comes from the sun. That inherently will heat it up, just like, right, if you don't wear a baseball cap, or if if it's warm outside and you don't shade yourself, you don't find a place in the shade, you'll feel warm. The most important, of course, driver of this is the fact that we're changing the atmosphere itself. So we've increased, right, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We're approaching doubling on this, and that's a substantial change. And that is like putting on a blanket. And when you put on a blanket, you warm yourself, right? That's why you put a blanket. The downside of what we've done is we put on one of those fancy weighted blankets that you can't get off very quickly when you're getting too hot. And so what we try to do, and what climate scientists are really focusing on, is, of course, those fundamentals of the role that carbon dioxide plays, the role that land surface change plays in the warming that we're observing. We are trying to understand how those are rooted in the fundamentals. Right, so one of the quick things that I like to say is it's not just we see a plot of carbon dioxide going up and we see a plot of global temperature going up, and climate scientists said, okay, that's the response, that's the reason. It's actually based in fundamentals of physics and chemistry to understand how carbon dioxide molecules interact with different types of radiation. And so over the last 50 years, we've developed a really, really robust understanding of the observed change that we see in the past. And these are driven by diverse observations, right? We have temperature sensors all around the world. We have satellites. We have, in some cases, records that can go back hundreds of years. And in places like the United States has temperature records going back 200 years in some places. And we're actually able to document, not only are we seeing a change there, but we're actually observing a change in the composition of our atmosphere. And then we can develop models and numerical tools that have allowed us to really start to see that there is a clear connection between these two. And we are unfortunate, and an unfortunate part of time in which we've started to realize that this signal is really coming out of the noise. And we're, there's an example every day in the news of something that's potentially being linked to climate change. And the reality is that climate change is here. And so all of these things that scientists like Jim Hansen had been saying, right, going back into the 70s and 80s, the reality is we're living that future. That future back then is now our reality now, and so we have an opportunity to look at the future and say, can we better prepare to avoid the reality that's currently being projected?
So Carol, just thinking about that type of information, and you mentioned at the outset Domini's twin goals of universal human dignity and ecological sustainability. What does that mean for you as an investor? How do you think about our role and our work on climate change? How does it affect the decisions you make?
Yeah, so I think I'll just start off by saying, protecting our planet is core to our investment standards. And that's because we recognize that climate change is one of our greatest existential threats. So when we're looking at investments, we're really seeking to channel our capital in a way that will enrich our ecosystems and avoid harm. So we like to support renewable energy, mass transit, energy efficient technologies. We like to see companies that are aligned with the climate-based target initiatives that are aligned with the 1.5-degree scenario for our climate. And we'll even look for companies that have strong recycling programs, have really solid product life cycle design, so we're not just trashing and tossing a lot of really valuable minerals into our landfills. And really seeking to avoid that waste and build more of a circular economy. But I think also critical to that is that we do exclude companies in the fossil fuel energy sector as one of the heaviest emitters. So we have for many years excluded producers and refiners, but dating back to about 2019. We also excluded the entire GICS energy sector, which is a financial way of saying that also includes the companies that support them. So the transportation companies, the logistic companies, service companies, just with that tie back to that industry. So, I think thinking about it and thoughtful across all of our industries, one of our emerging focuses is, in fact, on business model transition. So we know that we have the industries that we have, but we're going to need those players to really be changing their business model and thinking into the future. And we're willing to work with them on that. So if there is a point where we have to use that role as investors to encourage change and to see those business model transitions that are going to be so critical to us being able to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees.
So maybe to take us back to New York City in the local context a little bit more, you alluded to this a little bit with the Long Island Sound. Superstorm Sandy, flooding in the subways, flooding in the streets. My kids are sad there are fewer snow days. What is the situation for those of us in New York, and how will extreme weather be affecting communities here?
Yeah, well, just to start, I want to maybe mention that just recently the New York State put out the New York State Climate Assessment, came out in NYSERDA, and it's a great resource for those of you that are interested. You can just Google New York Climate Assessment and find it. And that actually outlines a lot of what we might see or what we should anticipate to see in New York City and the surrounding areas. So one of the area that my group focuses on is on changes in rainfall. And so we have already seen in the Northeast a pretty substantial, on the order of 10+% increase in annual rainfall every year over the historical period over the last 50+ years. And then we've actually seen that the changes, and we alluded to earlier in the audience, is actually larger when you start to look at extreme events. And the wild thing about this is you don't have to think back very far enough. You have to just think to this past Saturday, right, when large parts of the city received 2+ inches of rain in a few hours. And we again, right, even though we had just saw it 3 times in the fall, we again saw pictures of subways flooding, right? Whole towns on downtowns in places on Long Island like Huntington and Norfolk flooded. And so this is exactly what we'd expect, is more of this. And part of that, of course, is due to the change in the weather itself and the extremity of the events. Part of that is also due to the fact that we have an infrastructure in place in the city, right, that was designed for New York City in the 1950s and 60s, and not for New York City in the 2020s. And so that's part of the stress, right? So it's not, when you see, it's important to think about when you see those images, it's not just climate change, it's also, right, the fact that our infrastructure is not equipped, not only for climate change, but also the current capacity. A couple other things, sea level rise is a huge player for New York and New York City and the surrounding areas. We've already seen inches of increase in the sea level. And the expectation is that by mid-century, we'll probably see anywhere from a foot to 2 feet increase in the sea level. That's just the baseline average sea level in the area. And that could be much larger by the end of the century. And it's worth noting that is baked in. If we stopped emitting carbon dioxide today, the ocean will continue to warm because it lags the atmosphere, and so the sea level will continue to rise for decades, even if we stop. The other aspects that I think that aren't talked about as much is we're just seeing generally warmer days. We're seeing less cool days, right? So that impacts the snowstorms. There's less of them, but there is still the opportunity for significant snowstorms because there is more moisture in the atmosphere. So when the conditions are right, you can get really intense snowstorms. The other aspect I was just looking at today was the fact that in some areas of New York, we might expect 3-4 times increase by the end of the century in the number of days that are above 90 degrees. Right, so even if it's right now, it's maybe 10 times a year, and those are the days you avoid the subway, right? Because it's 90 degrees on the street, it's like 105 down there and humid. Imagine if that is occurring 40 days a year, right? And that really affects our livelihood and way of life. And just to finish, I think that the impacts will also be dependent on where you live in the city or where you live in the region. Right, there's been a lot of data that has shown now if you live near Central Park or an area that has green space, you won't experience the heat of those 90-degree days as much as if you live in an area that doesn't. And so when the one issue or one challenge with these general statements that I just made is that it's hyper local, just like one area will flood and another won't. That it's hard to compare a neighborhood in Brooklyn to a neighborhood in Queens to a neighborhood in Manhattan. And I think it's important that we recognize that when we start thinking about the impacts.
So now we'll pivot to talking about what do we do about it? How do we leverage our role for positive change? And I think Domini has long had a commitment to stewardship, active ownership, impact investing, which distinguishes us from peers. And I wonder if you could talk about, Carol, why does this matter to us as a firm, and what do you see as the potential for our work and engagement?
As an investor, you're in a unique position. You have a seat at the table, and you can influence companies. And often, they're open to a dialogue. We have a couple of different tools at our discretion, but at the end of the day, the driving force behind each of those tools is to really promote positive change in areas where we see weakness. So we've been focusing on some of the heaviest emitters in our portfolio, and we're looking for them to address transition planning, those business models that we talked about, as well as emission reductions. We're really seeking to see them establishing strategies and targets that are aligned with that 1.5-degree scenario.
So I think just that macro impact is really powerful. And then is it for yourselves individually, or what's the power of an individual? What can each of us do? We can start with you, Kevin, and then turn to you, Carol.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I mean, I wrote a bike to get here, right? So there are small things that we can do individually that can reduce our carbon emissions. And so one of the ways to do that is to change the way we get around the city, or if we live in the suburbs, how we get around it. It doesn't mean you have to sell your car. It just means, could you carpool one more time than you typically did? Or do you make a decision right about what your next car is? So there's personal decisions about transportation, because that's a large component of greenhouse gas emissions. Another aspect, of course, is the food system. And And so you can make decisions about your diet. You don't, right? So in some cases, if it's your prerogative, you can go extreme, right, and not eat meat or at least beef. That's one small thing. Or you can do a more modest approach, which is if you typically had a hamburger 3 times a month, have a hamburger 1 time a month, right? So you can still have the food that you like. You're just making a decision to reduce the ones that you know are particularly carbon intensive. But we also have to, put our money where our mouth is and do stuff and make decisions about, what types of cars we do want to buy. If we want to go on that nice trip to somewhere in the middle of the Pacific, or can we do something that's a little bit closer?
Sure. And then Carol, for an investor, I think, how does one get started if they want to align their commitment to address climate change with their investments?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people, and we've talked about those options. A lot of people are already tuned into the power of their dollar when they're purchasing, right? You purchase organic cotton, you choose to buy a reusable beverage container rather than purchasing bottled water. You avoid fast fashion. You'll, even in your lifestyle choices, you'll take a train instead of a plane, or you'll be an avid recycler, or you'll implement meatless Mondays, or, so you're all, right, we're already cued into this, and we're doing this in little ways in our life. But what I find when I talk with investors that are unfamiliar with sustainable or impact investing is they've forgotten about the power of their savings, whether it's retirement or in their savings account. And you, as an investor, can make that choice to, seek harm and put capital to work in ways that provide solutions.
Well, thank you, Kevin and Carol, so much for your comments, for the rich questions, of ideas. We've all learned at least a few things here tonight. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your insights, and for the rich conversation that we've had. We invite you. Thank you.